Hey, what's up, camp believers and high performers? Welcome to another episode of the Can't Believe I Made It podcast. I am your podcast host, high performance mentor, dietitian, Desi Abeda. All right, I am having a lot of fun being able to dive into limiting beliefs because here, let me be perfectly frank with you all as a pod family. Um, when I provide content or provide ways to work through some of these things and bridging the gap between possibly who you are right now and who you want to become, let me also just be really vulnerable and say, like, I'm still working at this stuff too. And I'm noticing something as we're going through this, and because a lot has come up, I'm actually getting a lot of really good ideas. I'm thinking that I'm going to be launching a short-term program on helping you to overcome limiting beliefs, but giving it much more of a feel of helping you to create the tactics and to create the roadmap for you to get to that place where you're really, really comfortable with where you're at. You know what you need to do, and then beyond. I'm thinking that I want to do that because I'm starting to explore a lot of my limiting beliefs through a lot of this work. And what's really tremendous about that type of work is, and you probably know, I mean, if you're in this place right now where you're really working through maybe some self doubt, some imposter syndrome, I would guess by now that as a pod family, that if you're listening up to this point, episode 85, you yourself are working through some of your stuff. So if you're coming from that place, you also understand that this work is not for the faint of heart. It's really hard and intentional work because what it invites you to do, and we talked about this during our Mentorship Monday pod, what you honestly have to do is you truly have to get to a point where you invite all pieces of you to, we talked about that on Monday. You invite all pieces of you in the morning to coffee, right? And so when you're trying to overcome limiting beliefs, I think one of the things that we have to really get behind is that one, it's not easy work. Two, as you're working through it, a lot of it possibly is a great deal of past conditioning, core messages or possibly core wounds that you got as a child, or maybe that you got during a certain relationship, or maybe in a certain job, or whatever that is. We create these core memories and they tend to define how we interact in other areas of our life. Prime example, one of the things that has come up for me throughout a lot of my life, and this started as a very young kid, me working through my healing journey, is you're not enough. And that's something that I continually work through on and on and on. And what I'm finding through a lot of my work is one, again, we talked about this in the Mentorship Monday. So if you have no idea what I'm talking about, make sure that you go back to episode 84 so that you can play this into our Things That You Need to Hear series. But we talked about how as that happens, you really want to reality check it. You want to fact check it because in a lot of ways, some of the things that you're telling yourself, that inner self critic, it's one, it's not kind. Two, it in a lot of ways it's not true. And it's really based off of areas of shame where you really believe that there's something inherently wrong with you. And that tends to really stifle a lot of growth. And I'm not just talking about things that I've seen, but as I work with a lot of our high performer elite program members, it's stuff that comes up constantly for them. And while like, and I posted this on my stories, so hopefully you get a chance to go over there and see it. We had a really, really great week. And I think what was really phenomenal about it is a lot of our elite members are seeing some of their wins in a really big way. We have people who just crossed the 50th episode of their podcast. We have someone who's in their second career, just absolutely killing it. We have a phenomenal writer who wants to become a reality TV person. And there's just so much about what's happening with a lot of our group members. We have other thought leaders, other really, really high level tech people who are just doing phenomenal things. And it points back to habits. It points back to how they spend their time, how they're boosting their awareness of how they feel, how they want to interact with the world. And it goes back to the self-care practice. And you probably know this as a pod family. When things are in complete disarray, you can probably pinpoint a couple different areas, but one thing that is definitely certain is that you're probably not taking care of yourself in the way that you need to. You're probably not sleeping as at the way that you really would love to. You're probably not as active. You're probably not eating that well. Your mental health is in complete shambles. your communication, your relationships. There's just a lot that comes with this. And so as we continue to work through some of our limiting beliefs, and we continue to break down barriers for what that means, I think it's an empowering task not only to hear other stories, but to continue to try to tell your own. I just jumped on a really cool like workshop where I was one of the keynote people. And shout out to you, Diversified Dietetics, doing amazing things in the field of dietetics and really creating and boosting diversity and creating more conversation around it. One of the questions got asked, like, how do you cultivate confidence? And what I had said was, you really have to come from a place of being okay with telling your story and continuing to tell your story over and over and over again. Because even as I was telling my story, and I said, it's really good for me to do stuff like this because it reminds me about all of the small wins that have happened up to this point so that I can truly appreciate the much more massive wins. So I'm not gonna lie to you. There on some mornings I might wake up and I'm feeling really, really phenomenal about where I'm at in life. And I'm really, really honing in on the habits that really, really fulfill me and refill my cup so that I can pour into you all, I can pour into my clients, I can pour into my family, I can pour into those things that are value systems of mine. And there are a lot of other days where I'm just not feeling it. And the bare minimum for me is like, hey, you made a commitment to yourself just to show up. Like, go show up, show your face. And that's something and a mantra that I continue to live by because I honestly don't wake up every day like, okay, I'm a badass today. I got some badass messages. Let me go ahead and do this. I'm just being honest with you all as a pod family. Like, there are days where I'm like, man, is there something inherently wrong with me that something's not being built in the way that I thought it was going to be, or maybe I'm not seeing growth in certain areas, or maybe I have some money stories. There's just a lot that comes up, and I think for us as we continue these conversations, we really have to tell our story, which brings me into episode 85. We're going to continue with our Things That You Need to Hear series where we take a TED Talk and we talk about it. We listen to it and we break it down a little bit more and we have an ongoing conversation about it. And so with episode 85, I felt like it would be a really phenomenal time. I took this from the TED Women's Conference in 2021 this past year, and I was personally really, really, really happy. I personally didn't even know this female actually did a TED Talk. So, if you don't know Candace Parker, you definitely need to. She's a two-time NCAA champ, two-time Olympic gold medalist, and a two-time WNBA champ. She literally just got done winning a WNBA championship. So when I saw that she was going to do a TED Talk, I was like, oh my God, I have to listen to what she wants to say because as a father to a young girl that really wants to empower her and to really try to create a community and environment in my home where equality is a must and we're loving each other through our differences. As this came up, I was like, I can't not like talk about Candace Parker because she is one of the greatest female basketball players and athletes that we've ever seen. And so, with this introduction, you kind of know by now, I want to make sure that I introduce it right. So, let's go ahead and take what Ted wrote for her. So, what can Candace Parker do? A two-time NCAA champ, two-time Olympic gold medalist, and a two-time WNBA champion. Parker knows what it takes to fight for your dreams. In this inspiring talk, she shares what she's learned during a career spent not on accepting limits and how her daughter taught her the best lesson of all. Barrier breaking is about not staying in your lane and not being something that the world expects you to be. It's about not accepting limitations. All right. So without further ado, we'll go ahead and watch the first part of this talk. We'll talk a little bit about it and then we'll watch the second part. So here is Candace Parker's How to Break Down Barriers and Not Accept Limits. I hope you enjoy.
Everywhere in the world, the question inevitably comes up, do you play basketball? From the neighbor across the street, hey, do you hoop? To the 5'7" guy at TSA pre-check that swore that he could beat me one-on-one. I despise fitting into the lane or the mold that this question insinuates. But I reluctantly say yes. I am a two-time NCAA champion. Thank you. A two-time gold medalist and a two-time WNBA champion. But inside, I scream, I am so much more. You see, barrier breaking is about not staying in your lane and not being something that the world expects you to be. It's about not accepting limitations. It starts with inspiration, and it's a foundation built upon picking apart what everybody thinks is the right way to do things. There are so many barrier breakers in here that are fighting so hard to unlock doors that they may never walk through, but they do it anyway because we're standing on the shoulders of those that did it for us. It's an uphill battle, and it doesn't guarantee big wins or lots of success. And throughout that uphill battle, I think all of us look for hope, right? We all look for optimism. And mine is my daughter and this next generation. You see, I get to be the mom to an amazing 12-year-old daughter. Yes, I know I'm partial, but she's pretty dope. I've been fortunate enough to travel the world with her while she allows her mom to fight for her dreams. We've played in Russia, and I say we because she really does think she's part of the team. We've played in Russia, Turkey, China. And throughout that journey, I thought I would be the one teaching her, challenging her, being the example for her. But I realized it's a two-way street. You see, at 3 years old, I decided to enroll her in school in Russia. I want her to have a normal life, right? I want her to be able to meet kids her age. So at 3, she befriended this little girl. Her name was Masha. Masha didn't speak any English. Layla barely spoke Russian. But her parents invited us over to their house. And so we went for this play date. So we knock on the door, and Masha's parents open the door so graciously and welcome us into their home. And we step forward, and I realize there's no floor. It's a modest home. It's one room with a couch on the side that pulls out into the bed that they sleep on. There's a wood fire oven in the middle that heats the room and that they cook with. And at 3 years old, I was concerned. So I go to grab Layla, but I was too late. She looked in the corner and she said, "A dollhouse." And Masha and Layla ran to the corner to play with the dollhouse. I'm so proud that that's my kid. And I can't say that I had much to do with that. She has a way of uniting people, of finding commonality, of rolling with the punches, of making the best of situations. I've always wanted to uplift her because the messaging that I received from home was never shrink yourself to fit into this world, that you're enough, that everyone is enough, that you need to be individually you all the time. I was fortunate to grow up in an environment with my parents and my 2 brothers who empowered me every single day. They told me I can do anything I set my mind to, so much so that my nickname was Can Do. And it was later extended by my brothers to Can Do Anything and Get Away with It. I was the baby of the family. Yes, I was the baby, and I didn't lack confidence. If I wasn't kicking the ball out of the recess school parking lot in a dress to my mom's despise, or high in the trees, I love to compete at everything, not just in sports either. This one time, my teacher in elementary school, he said, I want to know who can learn the helping verb song the fastest. Is our do, does, did, was, were, been, has, had, shall, am, will, must, can, be, should, would, want, could, being, may, did, was. I love to compete. I was that kid. But what I loved so much was that I was allowed to be me. I was allowed to compete. I was allowed to speak my mind. My parents encouraged that. Just because you're a girl, you don't have to stay in a certain lane. And then something happened in 1997. The Women's Professional Basketball League started. The WNBA had its inaugural season when I was 11 years old. And I saw people that looked like me playing the game that I loved so much. I no longer had to go out in the driveway and try to dunk like Michael Jordan. I could go out and get buckets like Cynthia Cooper. You see, my parents encouraged sports because sports in their eyes was a microcosm of life. You learn to win, you learn to lose, you learn to work through obstacles, you learn to get up when you don't want to. You learn to value differences because those are important.
There's so much, yeah, as we take a pause and we'll definitely go into part two here, there's so much value in there that Candace is talking about that I really love. First and foremost, why she got to call out the 5'7" guy? Like, I'm 5'7". Joking aside, I took a couple notes when I first listened to this, and what I really loved is in regards to breaking barriers. She mentioned something like the way that you're living your life is doing so in a way where you're standing on the shoulders of the people that got you there. And it brings me back to a conversation that I had a couple months ago with my therapist and my therapeutic journey when I was really, really struggling with a lot of imposter syndrome, really, really struggling with a lot of self-doubt. And, shout out to you, Dr. G, if you hear this, my man. Um, One of the things that he said is like, man, you got to honor the people that got you to where you are today. And I feel like that is such a cherishing thing to think about. A lot of you as our pod family, some of you have probably come from backgrounds where you really, really had some phenomenal parents. Some of you had parents that were imperfect but did the best that they could. Some of you might have really, really estranged relationships with your parents. And regardless of where that is coming from, the thing that I want us to really sit with is regardless of how you feel about what your upbringing was, there were people that got you to where you are today, to where you're at least coming from a place of evaluating where you are, bringing in some awareness, and really working towards authenticity. If you're listening to this podcast, you are exactly that person. And so doing things and really honoring the people that got you there, I think that was one of the biggest things, just hearing Candace Parker talk about what it means to break barriers, and even kind of filtering into what she's talking about with her daughter. For those of us who aren't parents, I'm sure there are people that we do things for. Maybe it's not the next generation, but maybe it's a friend, a family member, or something. You're just honoring who you are as a person so that they themselves can go be their most authentic self, so that the growth is exponential, right? And I think that's a really, really big thing for us to think about. And the other thing that I really love too is she talked about sports being a microcosm of how we live our life. There's so much that I resonate with that, because I think as an athlete myself, who is super, super competitive, there's an ongoing joke in our home. You don't play card games, or you don't allow the abetas to play, because they're going to end up fighting one another, because we're just so damn competitive. But when we look at like sports in general, and this could be the same thing for those of you who really, really love the arts. This could be the same thing for those of you who really love other things. It's a microcosm of how you represent yourself and how you look at your environment. What I really, really love about sports is that everyone is coming from different backgrounds and differences. And there's a common goal behind being able to communicate effectively, being able to lock arms and to trust one another, and then also being able to trust in yourself. And I think when we look at sports just in general, it is a microcosm, and it is very metaphorical for how we want to live our lives as high performing people. Because you are, at some point, you're going to rely on others. And I don't know where this quote comes from, but I definitely resonate with it, and I'm sure that you can too. No successful person in this world has ever said, I did this by myself. There were always people that were upholding them, supporting them, talking with them. And there's so much about this that really breathes for me. And I want you to let this sit in with what healthy connection looks like. All right. So let's go ahead and go into part two of Candace Parker's TED Talk from the 2021 TED Women's Conference.
But as I ventured out into the world, I realized the world wasn't so uplifting towards differences, right? The world had a way of putting differences in a box. For instance, I received my girls' basketball uniform in middle school. It was old and smelly and tight. the boys got brand new ones. My brother worked his butt off to get into one of the most prestigious medical schools in the country. My family was so proud. We heard the whispers. They said quotas. The world had a way of just putting differences in a box and then getting mad when we had the audacity to not fit. Just as an individual, you get mad at me for not fitting in the box that you made. There was a time that went by where I didn't want to say yes to the basketball question. Because if I checked that box, then I checked all of their other assumptions, right? So competitive juices kicked in. I'll show you. I'm going to be the best. Girls can't dunk in a game, I'll dunk twice. You can't hold up an MVP trophy pregnant? Okay, I'll show you. You can't have a family, a career, and nurse your daughter. I came back 9 weeks post-delivery and I played in a game and I nursed my daughter for 13 months. You can't be on the cover of a video game. You can't do a TED Talk as an athlete. But this entire time, my idea of breaking barriers was being something so that the world could see that it was possible. But breaking down barriers isn't always records. In 2020, like most of you, I sat around the television because I knew this was a moment. I sat my daughter front and center. I said, Layla, watch this. The first African-American Asian vice president was being sworn in. This is a moment that you might not appreciate now, but in time you will. And as Kamala Harris was being sworn in, I said, Layla, now look at her. Now you can do that too. And Layla looked at me. She looked through my eyes and she said, why couldn't I before? Suddenly I felt this big because I had become what I despised the most in this world. I had put her in a box because you see, the story that the world told me was women aren't vice presidents. And I had assumed that that's what they had told my daughter. I'm telling you, Generation Z, my daughter's generation, they're changing the world. They're changing the world through conversation, through unity, and through living as though boxes and barriers don't exist. It's no longer enough to just put your head down, get the job, accomplish the feat. We have to unite to come together to figure out why barriers are there in the first place. And Generation Z is doing that. They're listening. They're seeing both sides. And they're uniting for causes that don't directly impact them. We have entire sports leagues that are standing up for what they believe in. It's no longer just one athlete. We have men that are fighting for women to receive equal pay. We have white allies that are protesting racial inequalities. We are talking about mental health. And you know what's so special? My daughter the other week, a couple weeks ago, came up and handed me a list of stores that we're not allowed to shop at anymore. So I'm like, Layla, like another lesson, like already? She's like, Mom, we're not allowed to shop at these stores because they're not body positive and body conscious towards all shapes and sizes. And you know what? I'm listening. I'll be honest, and I'm learning, and you should too. Because my optimism lies in the next, that they will take our obstacles, our struggles, our insecurities, our challenges, and not see them as obstacles, but as opportunities. Or they may not even acknowledge them at all. I'm proud because Generation Z are proud, bold, and they're themselves. Because those that were told that they can't their entire life are having kids that are making us believe that we can. So go ahead. Ask me if I play basketball. And I'll proudly say yes, because I realized I was the one putting basketball in a box all along. Thank you so much for this opportunity. Thank you. Thank you. you so much.
Oh man, I've said this a couple times to you all, and I want to continue to say it. This is definitely in line with like continuing to tell my story, right? My daughter did something really special within me, and it's something that I'm so grateful for because these next generations are going to facilitate things that we've needed for quite some time. And as the leaders in this world, me personally as a millennial, I'm taking this to heart. I'm taking it personal. And I want to encourage you all to take it personal as well. How you act, the things that you say, your habits, your rituals, taking radical responsibility with how you interact with this world is so damn special because I mean, especially for parents or anyone who's ever been around a kid and you actually slipped a cuss word, right? You actually slipped the F word or shit. Like they'll say it. They're a sponge. And Candace Parker was talking about Gen Z, and I am so fortunate to have two Gen Zers in my family, two of my younger siblings. What up, Marisa and Nico? She's not lying with how open they are and how unapologetic they are with how they interact with the world. And there's a part of me that feels really, really proud because while we're all coming from similar backgrounds, I like to think of myself as a leader. And I like to think of myself as someone who is not perfect, but someone who is really, really competitively trying to be my healthiest, highest, and happiest self so that I can teach the next generation. And it's something that I think is so valuable because Candace Parker talked about breaking down barriers and trying to get out of boxes. And I like to think about this too. And I want you to think about this. Obviously, with these things that you need to hear series, the whole point behind this is like, okay, how do I take this information and apply it to my life? And how can I learn from this to be my higher and greater self, right? How can I interact with this in a way where I can teach others? Or I can be the type of person that is able to uh, be about the things that they say, right? And as I was hearing her talk about it, these boxes, your limiting beliefs are just that. They're the boxes they're the stories that you tell yourself. And they're possibly a lot of the stories that maybe you received as you were younger, or maybe you've received at some point in your life. But those boxes that we all have them, and there are limiting beliefs around who you should be, what you should do, what you should look like. I can't tell you how many times, especially early on in my career as a dietitian, that people would come to me with just feeling really disgusted with how they look, right? And they had this expectation in a lot of ways that was not realistic, but it was based off of comparison syndrome. And as we dove in a little bit more, it dove back into helping them to understand that there's a core wound that happened, right? And there's some sort of past conditioning that happens. So when we look at stepping out of these boxes, we're really looking at stepping out of your own limiting beliefs. Because I heard this on a podcast, the Quick Brain podcast, that I really loved. If you fight for your limitations, you're going to keep them. So I just want you thinking about this as we come to a close with episode 85 here. We're almost at 100. Let's go. Um, Nothing changes if nothing changes. And if you fight for your limitations, you're going to keep them. So as we examine those two sayings right now, I just want you to think about it right now. Like, what limitations, what stories are you telling yourself right now that it's not serving you? And if, as you become a little bit more aware of what that story is, what do you want to do with the information? How do you want to reality check that? What sort of support do you need in order to get to that next endeavor, in order to get to that point where you're celebrating those small wins? Because that's one thing as high performer elite program members are doing right now is like we're celebrating the small wins, because if we don't, then who is? All right. I love you all. As always, if there's something that really spoke to you, make sure you take a screenshot. Hit up Candace Parker. Let her know she did a phenomenal job. My gosh, that woman is such a phenomenal person, mom and athlete. And it's something that I really, really resonate with. All the things that I remind myself of, things that I've been able to accomplish. I'm so much more than that, and it's really cool to hear someone who is a high performer in what she does to acknowledge that, because it's a really good message for all of us. While we should definitely be celebrating the small and big wins, we are so much more than our career, our job. We're we're important people in a lot of other people's lives. I think it's a really good reminder that we come to that. All right, love you all. Catch you on the next Mentorship Monday. Let's go.